So Democrats are once again engaging in our hallowed tradition of the circular firing squad. And I've got one thing to say to all Democrats. Stop it! Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an activist, and I'm here to help you stand up for your values against the BS of the MAGA crowd. So President Biden gave his State of the Union speech the other day, and I wouldn't exactly call it a barn burner, but it was a pretty good speech. And overall, it was pretty well received. I mean, I love the take that Stephen Colbert had about it, which was that it's a roller coaster ride of rip-roaring reasonableness. Now, after 4 years of the spoiled child throwing his temper tantrums in the White House, it was actually really nice to have an adult who's a reasonable human being running the country. As I've stated in other videos, Biden deserves a lot of credit for the kind of leadership he's provided through what is really one of the biggest crises that we've faced in foreign affairs, really almost since World War II. He did an amazing job of getting vaccinations into people's arms, and now we're really moving past the crisis of the COVID pandemic. All this despite the fact that Republicans have done everything they could to stand in the way of making progress on this. And the economy, despite what people think, is actually doing really well. The job numbers keep being very positive. Our GDP is growing. Do we have some inflation? Yes, but we're dealing with it. And really what's especially remarkable is what a wild ride this first year has been of the Biden administration. I mean, Trump, up until the COVID pandemic, basically never dealt with a crisis that was not self-inflicted. Biden, on the other hand, has dealt with one crisis after another that he did not cause. I mean, he's dealt with the pandemic and the associated economic crisis as a result of it. He's dealt with the Ukraine invasion. He got us out of Afghanistan. And granted, some people don't think that went all that well, but the truth of the matter is, we still got 120,000 of our allies out, finally getting the United States out of the longest war of its history. And we passed a massive bipartisan infrastructure package, something that Trump was constantly talking about doing, but never did. So really, we as Democrats should be very happy about the fact that we have somebody like Joe Biden, who's actually, I believe, a sincere, caring, and good person. Even though I may disagree with him on many things, even though I wish that we were a little more aggressive in certain ways, and even though he was not my choice in the primaries, I do believe that he's at least trying to do the right thing by our country, something I never felt with the prior guy. And actually, it's really quite remarkable the amount of things that he's been able to accomplish. People poo-poo his getting through all the judges, more judges than any other president has at this point, including Donald Trump. Passing the massive COVID relief bill without a single Republican vote. Getting an infrastructure bill passed, which is going to mean shovels in the ground and fixing our roads, for crying out loud, and dealing with some of the climate issues that we have. And finally, dealing with these multiple crises that have been dumped in his lap that he did not ask for, believe me. But what are we as Democrats doing instead? Well, we're frustrated because he hasn't gotten enough done. We're upset because he hasn't been able to bring along Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, the only two U.S. senators who've stood in the way of eliminating the filibuster and passing meaningful election reform. He hasn't been able to force these separately elected people, and especially in Joe Manchin's case, somebody who owes nothing to Joe Biden, to do his bidding. We argue that he somehow doesn't make us believe and feel good about ourselves. And this is the typical BS I've been hearing from Democrats since, well, the entire time I've been a Democratic activist, since I've been in college. Rather than celebrating our victories, we feel sorry for ourselves and focus on the negatives and literally walk our way into defeat, something that Republicans are all too happy to let us do. In fact, one of Lee Atwater's maxims, back when he was George H.W. Bush's campaign manager for president, was never get in the way of an opponent while he's self-destructing. And we as Democrats have a tendency to do that. I mean, we're upset about the recall of certain elected officials out in San Francisco. Well, guess what? Those elected officials are going to be replaced with progressive Democrats. We're upset that Joe Biden couldn't get his entire agenda passed. Well, he had a bare majority in the Senate and barely a majority in the House. And really, it's amazing how much he has gotten done. And now, and as always, I'll link to the articles down below, Joe Manchin is even saying that he is willing to negotiate a little and come up with at least something that will achieve some positive change that the Build Back Better bill sought to do. I mean, after all, despite the fact that I'm furious with Joe Manchin, we have to remember he is still a Democrat who had spoken at Democratic national conventions. So my guess is he still wants to do something to help Joe Biden succeed. And my hope is that he actually will put his money where his mouth is for a change. And Nancy Pelosi, as an article that also I'll link to down below, has given us a roadmap for how we should be talking about our accomplishments and the fact that we're standing up for the real people of America rather than distracting them with BS that has nothing to do with the lives that they're actually living. And even though polling shows that Democrats are not viewed all that favorably right now, the polling does show that on the issues we continue to be incredibly popular. We support the issues that people want. And what's more, as G. Elliott Morris pointed out, which again I'll link to down below, the reason that Democrats are dealing with the issues we're dealing with right now have nothing to do with Biden's policies or progressives versus conservatives or Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema standing in the way of the Build Back Better bill and election reform. What it has to do with is the fact that the midterm election of an incumbent president tends to have a large vote against that president. And this has been something that we've seen consistently again and again throughout history. All this whining and gnashing of teeth is doing nothing to save us from defeat. And worst of all, it's actually probably helping the Republicans, essentially helping them snatch victory from the jaws of defeat while we could be defeating them. I mean, this is not the time for us to be sitting back on our laurels. There are two reasons for this. Number one, too much is at stake. I mean, look at the Supreme Court and what they're doing to our country. Democrats have to take control of Congress and have to introduce some type of election reform and some type of reform at the Supreme Court to address the wholesale havoc that this group of right-wing radicals are imposing upon our country. Number two, we're so close. We have the presidency, we have the House, and we have the Senate. If we can just hold on to the House and win 2 more seats in the Senate, something that's more than doable given the current map. I mean, we have races in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, to name 2, where we're favored to win. And Republicans have not been successful in recruiting good candidates against our most vulnerable incumbents. And our most vulnerable incumbents, frankly, are pretty impressive people. So if we can just hold on to the seats that we've got and win, say, Wisconsin and Pennsylvania as well, and hold on to the House, then all of a sudden we will have that majority in the Senate that will enable us to pass the legislation we care about and get rid of the filibuster. I mean, if you had told me just a couple of years ago that 48 out of the 50 Democrats in the Senate and the President of the United States and the House would pass some of the most important voting reform legislation and labor reform legislation to come before Congress really since probably the 1960s, I would have laughed at you. And that's the point. We just need 2 more votes in the Senate to get there. Now is not the time for us to get frustrated and to throw up our hands and lose faith. Now is not the time for us to give up. Now is the time for us as Democrats to spread the good news and encourage people to get active and to get out and vote. And I'm confident that if we don't give in to our worst instincts as Democrats, we stand a good chance of surviving the midterm curse and maybe even coming out of it in a position where we'll be able to actually get our agenda done. Now, here's a video that details exactly what Democrats need to do to win in the 2022 election. Why don't you check that out? I'll see you then. And in the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.